Everyone at the wedding thought it would be a perfect night. The music was soft, the lights were golden, and the air was filled with laughter. But when the groom locked eyes with a familiar face in the crowd, his exit all changed. His smile faded, and what should have been a day of joy quickly turned into something else. As he stood next to his glowing bride, he couldn't resist making a snide comment directed at his ex, loud enough for the guests to hear. Some laughed awkwardly, others looked around, unsure of what just happened. But she didn't say a word. Not yet. What no one expected was who walked in behind her just seconds later. Dressed in a tailored suit and radiating quiet power, her fiancé entered the room, calm, confident, and very, very wealthy. The groom froze. The room fell silent. And then, with a voice that cut through the tension like glass, the billionaire fiancé looked straight at him and said, "Shut up." What happened next left the entire wedding party speechless and changed everything. You won't believe how quickly the tables turned and who walked out with their head held high. Keep watching. This is where it gets real. The groom stood frozen, his smirk slowly fading as all eyes turned toward the man who had just spoken. No one knew exactly who he was yet, but the way he carried himself, confident, calm, completely in control, made people sit up straighter. The ex, still seated at the side table, didn't move. She just looked at the groom with a calm stare, as if she'd been expecting this. It was clear now she wasn't just a guest. She had been invited for a reason. And she hadn't come alone. Whispers spread across the tables. Some guests began to recognize the man he'd been on magazine covers, headlines, business articles. A billionaire investor, private but powerful. People started to realize this wasn't just an awkward moment. It was something deeper, more personal. The groom had once dated her, left her without a word. And tonight, in front of everyone, he tried to embarrass her, thinking she'd stay silent. But now, standing face to face with the man she was about to marry, everything shifted. The bride looked between the two men, clearly shaken. The atmosphere grew heavier with every second. No one knew what would happen next, but everyone knew this wedding was no longer about love and vows. It had just turned into something else. The groom stepped forward, his voice low but shaking, trying to regain control of the room. "You don't belong here," he said, eyeing the billionaire like he was a problem that could be removed. But the man didn't flinch. Instead, he placed a calm hand on his fiancée's shoulder. The woman the groom once left behind. "You made your choices," he replied. "Now live with them." The silence in the room deepened. Everyone could feel the tension, like the air itself had stopped moving. Guests whispered. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious. The bride stood frozen, her hand slowly slipping from the groom's arm. She hadn't known about his ex. Not really. He'd brushed off the past, claimed it was nothing serious. Now, the truth stood in front of her in a white dress and quiet strength. One of the bridesmaids exchanged a worried glance with another. A groomsman pulled out his phone, recording under the table. Meanwhile, the ex remained composed, but her eyes held years of hurt and lessons. She hadn't come to cause a scene, she'd come to close a chapter. But now, everything was unraveling. The groom's past wasn't just haunting him. It was standing tall, wealthier, stronger, and unwilling to be mocked again. The groom's jaw tightened as he looked around the room, realizing the attention had fully shifted. The bride no longer stood beside him. She had taken a step back. Her eyes locked on the ex, searching for answers she hadn't known to ask before. The guests watched in stiff silence, every breath held, waiting for what would happen next. The ex slowly stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You mocked me," she said softly, as if what we had never mattered, as if I was just something to toss aside. Her voice didn't shake, but something in the way she looked at him made the groom finally lower his eyes. The billionaire didn't speak again. He didn't need to. His presence alone made it clear he wasn't here for drama. He was here for her. And that simple fact was hitting the groom harder than any insult could. The bride turned to her groom, her voice just above a whisper. "Is this really the man I'm marrying?" He didn't answer. Couldn't. His silence spoke louder than any excuse. Someone in the crowd shifted. A chair scraped the floor, and the groom's mother quietly left the table. The room had changed. This wasn't a celebration anymore, was a reckoning. Just as the silence settled heavy in the air, a voice cut through from the back of the room sharp, uninvited. "He never told you about the messages, did he?" A woman stood near the entrance, holding her phone up, screen lit, face familiar to a few guests, but unknown to most. The groom's face went pale. The bride looked over, confused, and the ex turned sharply, eyes narrowing. The woman stepped closer, the crowd parting slightly. "I didn't come to ruin anything," she said, "but maybe it was already broken." She tapped her screen, and a message thread appeared, screenshots, time-stamped, unmistakably real. The groom's name at the top, words flirtatious, late night, recent. The tension exploded into shocked gasps. The bride took another step back, her hands trembling now. "These were from last month," the woman continued, "while you were out shopping for centerpieces." The groom tried to speak, but every word collapsed in his throat. The ex watched it all unfold, not with satisfaction, but quiet disbelief. This wasn't part of her plan. Her closure had become someone else's discovery. And now, the billionaire, calm until now, looked at the groom with a different expression, one that hinted this wasn't just about old love anymore. It was about character, respect, and what kind of man thought he could play everyone and still win. The bride stared at the groom, tears brimming in her eyes, not out of heartbreak, but out of betrayal. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Was any of this even real?" The groom tried to defend himself, his words stumbling out in half-truths and excuses, but no one was listening anymore. The screenshots had spoken. His silence earlier had spoken. And now, the weight of every choice he'd made was crashing down around him. The ex stepped forward. Not to gloat, but to speak clearly for the first time. "You didn't lose us," she said, her voice calm. "You threw us away. And now you're standing here wondering why no one's staying." With that, she turned toward the billionaire, who simply nodded, placing a reassuring hand on her back as they walked toward the exit together. But just as they reached the doors, the bride surprised everyone. She followed them not to beg, not to plead, but to thank the ex. "You saved me from a mistake I was about to make," she said quietly. And then, without looking back, she handed the groom's ring to his best man and walked out. The final twist came moments later. A man in a black suit approached the groom and whispered something in his ear. The groom's face drained completely. Turns out, the billionaire wasn't just a businessman. He was also the silent investor behind the groom's startup. And now, that funding was gone. The fallout wasn't just emotional. Was about to get financial too. The guests slowly began to rise from their seats, still unsure if the wedding was truly over. But deep down, everyone knew it was. The groom stood alone now, surrounded by silence. The sparkle of the hall suddenly dim. His bride was gone. His ex had walked away for good, and the man who once backed his dreams had just pulled the plug, without a word of warning. In a single night, the masks had come off and every lie had come to light. Outside, bride took a deep breath of cool air, finally free from the weight of what could have been a lifetime of regret. The ex slipped her hand into her fiancé's, not out of triumph, but peace. This wasn't about revenge, had become about clarity. Knowing when to walk away. Knowing your worth. In the end, the story wasn't just about betrayal or public humiliation. It was about truth finding its voice at the most unexpected moment. About second chances, not with old flames, but with oneself. And as the doors of the venue quietly closed behind them, the message lingered. Sometimes, what feels like the end is just the beginning of something far more real.